The drill seized like a held breath at 32 kilometers beneath Enceladus' ice. Maya Chen watched the torque spike flatten, the bit's telemetry cascade to a steady, impossible number, minus 271 degrees Celsius. Not a sensor hiccup. Every redundant line agreed. She cleared the cache, reran the calibration routine because ritual sometimes shamed physics into behaving, and got the same neat defiance back. "Ilya," she said over suit to suit, keeping her voice flat enough to stand on. "Instrumentation's wrong." Ilya Voronin didn't answer. He stood with his visor nearly touching the monitor hood, his breath smearing the inside glass to milk. 6 hours earlier, the phased array sonar had pinged a void where no void belonged, and something in him had tilted toward it and stayed tilted. Since then, he had been present the way a reflection is present. Perfect, a little too still, not guaranteed to survive a blink. Maya stepped beside him and pulled the drill camera feed full frame. Grain resolved to structure, a chamber wider than her mind's comfortable furniture. Its walls weren't rock or ice, but a translucent cartilage of frost, ribs repeating in hexagons, light sliding through them in patient pale sheets. Set into those ribs like seeds in a hive, 7 elongate enclosures, each about 3.5 meters from crown to heel. The camera's auto gain struggled, overshot, recovered. Inside each coffin clear polymer sheath, something held still at the boundary between shape and inference. "Not hibernation," Ilya said. His voice was a note with harmonics folded into it, a single line sung by 2 throats. "Buffering?" Protocol had a gravity of its own. Even down here, even staring at a geometry that looked grown, Maya felt it tug. She slid her gloved finger over the recessed stud that would kick a burst message up the cableway to Array K's Enceladus station. The stud's orange ring pulsed, patient. She held a centimeter off. "How long?" she asked, hating the question even as she shaped it, hating that she let his certainty summon hers. 41,000 years, he said, and then turned toward her. The HUD's internal LEDs bit a hard edge on his pupils. Too wide. Light should have closed them down to coins. "You're going to lower your hand," he added, gentle as gravity. She lowered it. The stud's orange pulse went on pulsing. The frequency started when Aran turned 9. Ilya's eyes didn't blink. He spoke as if they were mid-conversation, and she had agreed last page. "My brother." Aphantasia, diagnosed the year before. Couldn't picture a red ball on a white table if you poured one out in front of him. Maya's throat clicked when it unlocked. "Ilya, our father left a shortwave in the workshop." The dreams left a schematic. He tapped the helmet ring near his ear, a slow, absent rhythm. 18.7 hertz, through the bedroom wall, every night for 91 nights, damp the visual cortex, upregulate parietal integration. You cut away pictures and leave numbers. You make him into a receiver the message can cross. "You hurt him," Maya said, because someone had to say the human word for the thing. She put 2 fingers under the emergency seal at his neck ring because she had to do the human thing too. He unlatched his own seal first, a hiss, a whistle. Air that didn't deserve the name rolled in. Methane, nitrogen, a smear of tholins like the ghost of tar. Ilya breathed, and the readouts on his suit's chest scrolled past ranges they had been designed to show. His nails paled, beneath them bone showed through, fine and webbed like frost. "I aimed him," he said, and the laugh that escaped him wasn't a laugh. It was a chord. "Look at the assay." The drill had done what drills do when left alone, sampling without permission. A micro sniff from the chamber was already in the gene scanner's belly. Maya dragged the results up. Organic polymer signatures, double helix analog. The comparator reached, found, hesitated, returned a string with warning flags attached. Homo-adjacent. 24 chromosomal pairs. Divergence. 46 millennia forward, if you trusted the model, which Maya didn't, except that she did, because every other model in her had just failed. "They're not visitors," Ilya said softly. His skin had begun to forget it was skin. Translucence, starting at the nail beds and walking back over the fingers in a tide. They're returns. The nearest enclosure held a body you could call almost human, if you used human like a generous metaphor, limbs elongated for a different gravity, ribs glazed with a lattice of neural polymer that looked like lightning captured mid-diffusion. The face underlying all that not quite was a map she could still read. Brow ridge, cheek curve, jawline that would have thrown shadow right if you saw a shadow down here. Eyes closed. No breath fog on the interior, yet the monitors traced a respiration rhythm and a neural trace you could mistake for sleep if you needed the lie. "What are they running from?" Maya asked, surprising herself by trusting that running lived in the correct tense. "Themselves," Ilya said, and set his palm against the polymer. At the contact point, frost bloomed in straight lines, a star with a compass in its bones. It spread outward with a speed that wasn't speed so much as inevitability made visible. Under the thinning of his skin, shapes moved that were not veins and were not ink. Symbols, notations, the kind of small good handwriting you learn, copy and proofs you respect. "They came back to break the loop," he said. "Sleep is the only channel that crosses, but dreams drown in pictures. You can't send proofs through paintings. You need a receiver who never paints. Come up," Maya said, words arranging themselves around efficacy the way scaffolding arranges itself around buildings. "We can flood you with O2, ice your core, buy time to, in 5 years, 4 months, 19 days, Iran will be recruited to a facility under the Atacama. They'll call it Tier 0. They'll tell him he is building suppression tech. He won't be. He'll be teaching minds not to dissolve when they change state. Maya's hands stilled. She let her gaze move once over him, inventorying what she could treat. The exposed tissue at his wrist where glove met suit, the rawness at the unsealed ring, the way his chest rose and fell with a cadence that matched nothing mammalian. The part of her that carried checklists dutifully sorted what it could save. The part of her that had watched ice do math on Jupiter's smallest night knew what triage meant in a problem set like this. "How do you know the date?" she asked, because engineering earns its keep by asking the next tractable question. "The same way I knew where to dig," he said, and turned the palm he'd placed to the polymer so she could see her own helmet reflection swimming on the other side of it. "Because the message needed me to. Because the message is us in a tone we can finally hear if we detune ourselves enough to stop listening for pictures." The enclosure's occupant didn't move. The air in the chamber did. A pressure change the instruments caught, and her bones did too. On Maya's display, the neural net in the enclosure they'd touched glittered with a small exact pattern. Not random, not meaningless. Something between prime numbers and lullabies. "You broke protocol," she said, because a universe that allowed this still contained small comfort in naming obvious crimes. "So you can keep it," he said. "So you can choose how to report the truth." The drill cam's field of view stuttered as the bit settled. A distant crack ran along the chamber's far curve, venting something that was not gas in a way that was not wind. Beyond that fracture, darkness had weight. It pressed on glass and bone equally. The convergence, Maya asked, because naming coming storms is how you teach yourself to put out buckets. 5 years, Ilya said. 4 months, 19 days. Tier 0 will have 7 pods they call artifacts. One of them will not be an artifact. It will be a conductor who learned patience under acetylene skies. He blinked then, hard as if the lids had been heavy. When they opened, the irids at the edges of his pupils had doubled, a ring within a ring, a second aperture slotting on line. Maya, he added, and the way he said her name steadied a place in her she'd been pretending wasn't shaking. Tell them you lost me to a seal failure. Tell them we found exotic microbes. Tell them you flushed the line. You walked me through the lie, she said, and found she was already matching breath to his new cadence. Now walk back with me, and I'll give you the truth in exchange. His smile lifted one corner of his mouth like a weight he'd decided to set down. This part I don't get to walk, he said, and turned away toward the exit tunnel that led to the fracture and the plume, toward the cold fire that made Enceladus look like an angel in the telescopes of cities he would never stand in again. I'm not dying, Maya. I'm changing reference frames. Tell Aaron the same when he thinks he hates me for what I did to him. Tell him imagination is a beautiful noise, and sometimes you hear the signal by silencing it. Her body decided then, without asking permission. She snapped free the medkit on her thigh, palmed the spare mask, stepped. He held up a hand. The nails were glass clear now. Under the translucence, bone had stopped being anatomy and started being lattice. The word no came in a harmonic that didn't hit her ears and still landed. Let me try, Maya said. She hated pleading. She did it anyway. One step back, Ilya. One step toward the line. We can at least. You already did something harder, he said, and his gaze flicked to the orange ring around the comm stud, still pulsing, still unpressed. You hesitated. At the wrong thing, she snapped. At the right time, he said. It's enough. He walked the tunnel without hurry. He used both hands to steady himself at the last ladder, and that soothed something petty and human in her. That he still needed rails. That changing state didn't mean floating through it. The drill cam caught him as he stepped into the fracture's throat. A man scaled down against geology and made mythic by contrast. Plume light blued his face, made a clean engraving of his profile. He turned once, as if to take a last sightline on her across the gap, and then stepped into the vent. The camera kept it as pixels. Maya's mind kept it as a sequence of numbers because numbers were the only format she trusted not to blur. His suit exterior flashed with frost that wasn't frost. It organized along the seams, writ itself into straightness. For a moment, half a human breath, a dozen instrument ticks, he hung there like a punctuation mark placed correctly for once. Then the plume accepted him the way an equation accepts a term that finally fits, and he was gone. Silence landed with the small domestic sounds of a room no longer containing a person. The patient hiss of the recycler, the grindless whir of the camera gimbal compensating, the soft complaint of her own suit joints when her knees decided to bend. 17 minutes. She knew because she watched them pass. The count stamped at the corner of her feed, and the interior count stamped into the way her breath came and went. During the 4th minute, A hairline crack ran 3 meters along the chamber wall to her left and stopped, a held note unresolved. In the 9th, the nearest enclosure's neural lattice pulsed once in a pattern she recognized from undergraduate number theory, and she told herself later that it had been the lighting. In the 13th, her finger floated again over the orange ring and didn't press. In the 17th, she stood up inside the gravity she had chosen and pressed the stud. Array K, subsurface 1, she said, and her voice came out competent and level because she had put it there before she began. We have a cavity at 32 kilometers, dimensions transmitting now. Atmosphere methane nitrogen with complex organics present. Negative viable oxygen. Biological potential in trace concentrations. One suit compromised in a structural breach during sample retrieval. Contamination contained. Request immediate uphaul and quarantine protocol. Zeta boxes ticked themselves in the back of her head as she spoke. Lie, lie. Truth framed as lie. The one clean fact that didn't matter to anyone who wasn't in this room and attached to this outcome. She cut the channel. The orange ring went dark and stayed dark. Then she did the thing that made the rest survivable. She took the drill cam's full export, the raw feed, the redundancy lines, the pre-trigger buffers, the split second of his face turned toward her over his shoulder, and burned it to a slate drive the size of her palm. She heat-sealed the slate into the padding behind the right calf of her sleep pod back on Sakharov's station in a motion she had practiced for 3 years without knowing its object. She would perform that motion later with the same quiet competence she had just used to lie. For now, she stood in a room that had discovered it was a mouth and stared at 7 figures who had discovered it was possible to outrun your own future and still find it waiting. Ilya had called them returns. The word fit in her mouth like a seed. She closed the drill cam iris until the chamber was a coin of light and let the hiss of the recycler fill the space where his cord had been. Outside, Enceladus lofted another feather of ice into space, bright as a promise and cold as a proof. Inside, Maya Chen aligned the remaining truths, set the first lie like a keystone, and began the careful work of building a bridge she could not yet see but would not fail to cross. The elevator into the Atacama bedrock hummed at exactly 60 hertz. Martin Chen could tell without looking at his meter, because the note settled in his jaw the way a clean integer settles in a proof. He held the 7th series suppression helmet against his ribs, cradled like an instrument you tune by listening to what the room is already singing. "First time down?" the operator asked. Her badge read SOTO. The rest of her uniform tried and failed to disguise military habits. One palm hung near the emergency stop, fingertips relaxed, ready. "First time seeing it," Martin said. "I've been building for it since I was 12. "Aphantasia," Soto said, not quite a question. "You're the one who doesn't imagine." Martin had stopped correcting people. Can't picture sounded like a hole to them. For him, it was a shaped absence that let everything else fit. He heard the elevator's note and counted its harmonics instead of mapping it to color. He felt the concrete's mass as pressure rather than seeing a weight in his head. Where most people looked for pictures to understand a thing, he asked it for numbers. They passed strata in a sequence he could recite later. Sandstone, density 2.3 to 2.5 grams per cubic centimeter, then limestone at 2.7, then the abrupt low-density spoil that meant human excavation. The car slowed, braked with a sigh that rode the 60 hertz down to a polite whisper and opened onto geometry that had given up on being Euclidean out of courtesy to what it contained. Tier 0 was a corridor if you measured it, and a curve if you trusted your eyes. Fluorescence shone without quite casting shadows where shadows should have been. The air smelled like ethanol and sugar, cryogenic sweetness bleeding through the seals. A woman waited with a lab coat hand annotated to the elbows. She wore her hair pinned up in the efficient abstraction of someone who only remembered to make it neat when it interfered with a calculation. Her features were Japanese. Her voice had the gentle consonants of Tokyo wrapped around the clipped cadence of an American Grant cycle. "Dr. Kato," she said, then corrected herself with a small tilt of the head. "Yuki." "Martin," he said. She glanced down at the helmet. "The seventh." "Seventh revision," he said. "Fourth of the regulated resonance design. The first three were guesses. This one's a model." Her smile was the kind that refuses to get in the way of the work. "Good. You're going to need it sooner than makes sense." Before he could ask why, alarms threaded the floor like a low, tight wire. Not the howling terror of a fire bell, a sine wave, narrow and insistent, calibrating people. "Zone 1 manifestation, Base C," Yuki said, already moving. "Somebody's fear got loose." Base C had become a room full of water, except it wasn't water in the way Martin recognized the word. He stopped in the doorway and let his brain switch frameworks. To everyone else, technicians on tables, two medics pressed flat against a wall like they could lean out of drowning, it was liquid with intent. To him, it was decohered probability collapsing along a vector of panic. The more the man in the middle hyperventilated, the more the wave function insisted it was wet. "Thompson," Yuki said, identifying the man by tone and posture as much as name. Again. Martin slipped the helmet on. The band settled around his skull like a well-fitted question. The generator woke, and the world changed. 431.2 hertz. The counter-signal he had discovered by back-solving a problem he hadn't yet been allowed to see, rose under the room's anxiety like a second floor beneath a crowded house. He waited. It pushed against him, not pressure like water, not resistance like gel. More like the drag of a bad idea you haven't realized is bad yet. "Thompson." The helmet transmitted his voice without adding resonance. Pure tone. "Numbers. Give me your employee ID what?" Thompson's pupils were wide flooded discs. "ID 2287, he gasped. "Birth date. Reverse. In pairs. 071991. "Keep going. Your phone number. Bank routing. Count backward from 1,000 by sevens. No imagery. Just integers." The man's breathing changed. Shallower, slower, repeating in a rhythm the helmet approved. The room listened. The false water thinned, then failed to find purchase and sublimed into honest air, leaving frost-like crystals across metal and boot leather. Yuki was already collecting it with a microvac, the canister labeling itself on her tablet with chemical formulas that shimmered in colors Martin couldn't see and trusted anyway because he trusted her. "Crystallized anxiety," she said, as if it were a commodity you could trade for calm. "It has structure if you look at it from the right angle." "Everything has structure from the right angle," he said, and took off the helmet. The 60 hertz hum of Tier 0 slid back into his bones like a hand into a sleeve. The absence of the 431.2 made itself felt as the right kind of silence. "You're oddly suited to this place," Yuki said, tilting the canister to watch precipitous laugh and settle. Her laugh lifted and scattered into the air. He felt it as small shifts in pressure and guessed she saw it as color. Most people stumble into zone 1 and get caught in their own pictures. You walk through without catching a single image. I don't have any to catch, he said. It came out lighter than he felt. Come on, she said. You should see your shop. The workshop looked like someone had manufactured his notebooks at 1-to-1 scale. There were coils wound to irrational ratios he had only ever specified on paper. There were field generators built to tolerances he'd insisted were necessary, while men with budgets had insisted were not. There was, on the central bench, a notebook in 2 hands. His own small print proofs and a second scrawl he had seen once before on a page his sister had sent, and he had hidden under his mattress because he didn't know where else to put a missing person. He placed his fingers beside the scrawl and did not touch it. This handwriting belongs to a man who disappeared in the plumes of Enceladus, he said, hearing how improbable he sounded and not caring because the strokes on the page were fact. Ilya Voronin, Yuki nodded. The facility takes messages from elsewhere. Sometimes the elsewhere is the future. Sometimes the elsewhere is a dimension that leans on ours until chalk writes itself and code compiles in fonts no one installed. One signature repeats, she picked up a clear cube of resin. Suspended in it was a chalk mark. No slate, no wall. Just a line and a curve hanging like a preserved breath. It was a symbol he didn't recognize. It made his chest feel like a door he hadn't known was there until someone knocked from the other side. Prime, she said, the lucid one. Before he could ask, the facility changed key. The 60 hertz hum gained a tremor that compass needled his inner ear. The intercom breathed in and said, synchronized phase commencing. Containment ring. All personnel. Soto met them at the double bulkhead with a scan and that not quite humor you develop by force when your job is to keep the improbable inside. Masks ready? She said, though no one had brought masks. Helmets, yeah. Belief, perhaps. The observation ring looked down on 7 cryopods arranged with the arrogance of geometry certain of itself. Inside each pod lay a body built on the blueprint of Homo and edited for environment, the way a desert edits a plant. Neural networks lay like frost lace under translucent skin. Instruments ticked a heartbeat sleep cadence. The air had the sweet top note of cryo and something else. Ozone, maybe? Or the edge of a thunderstorm. They don't go synchronous without prompt, Yuki said. We didn't prompt. It began as pressure, not motion. Then motion happened everywhere at once. Frost traced itself into straight lines across glass. Hairline cracks in the polycarbonate frame of the viewing window arranged themselves into an arc that had no business existing. The condensation on the inside of the observation glass formed a pattern so precise, Martin's brain read it as text because no other category fit. Equations wrote themselves on everything that accepted chalk or condensation or stress. The glass, the floor, the long bones of his fingers, as seen through skin he had not realized was already beginning to thin. The math didn't spell words. It was a shape you either could or could not understand. He could. Check chromosome 23. The answer loops forward and back. The bridge was born tuned. Around him, people spoke the way you do when your mind picks wrong pronouns for the thing you're seeing. They, it, that. Yuki's gaze flicked between patterns, pupils doing something his eyes didn't know how to do. Soto, did not lift her rifle because you don't point a rifle at a proof. Martin was already moving. The medical lab was 3 floors up, 2 turns to a corridor that insisted on being a curve. The tech on duty, a compact man with hair that had decided its own percentage of gray without consulting him, looked up to object and didn't, because Martin already had the vacutainer tourniquet tied. "Sequence it," Martin said. "Focus on 23. You think? Just do it." The machine hummed. The readout built itself. Chromosome 23 braided into being on the screen, bands marching in pairs, then tripping, then looping where no loop should live. There were markers that belonged to ancestors he could name with dates, and markers that belonged to descendants who would never have names if this failed. It was a Mobius in meat. "That can't be," the tech said quietly, like you talk in an unfamiliar church. "It is," a voice said from the doorway, and the hairs along Martin's forearms rose not from fear, but from recognition that sits behind the eyes and pulls you toward itself. The man who stepped in belonged to 2 percentiles at once. His right side had given itself to a translucence that was not sickness. Through it, organs had the crisp kindness of diagrams. Vessels carried a slow flow that looked impossibly like formulas traveling a circuit. His left side wore age like a strobe, 20, 50, 30, 70, settling on nothing long enough for a story to latch. "Isaac Reeves," he said, and his voice contained harmonics that made the lab's instruments blink like they'd just heard their own names. "Hello, Martin. Your sister sends her love in the way people like us send anything now, through shaped outcomes. Maya," Martin said before he knew he meant to say it. Something in his chest that had been braced for years shifted its weight. "She's 68%, Isaac said. "Alive, useful, angry in the right direction. We'll get there, but first we need a floor that doesn't exist on paper." He lifted his shirt. A device like a decision was grafted to his sternum, filigree nested into skin and bone. It hummed at a frequency Martin didn't pick up with ears, only with the math that sits behind them. "Quantum anchor," Isaac said, tapping it with a knuckle. The sound made the lab glass ache. "Kept me at 94 instead of 95. 95 cost me 13 times before I learned humility." "We count failures?" Martin asked, a habit of mine surfacing as humor. "We keep the ones that help," Isaac said, and smiled with both halves of his face in different decades. "Tier 0.5, it shows up only some of the time. The parts of you tuned to it will find it. They found it in an elevator that arrived without being called and opened onto not a room, but a set of boundary conditions that remembered rooms fondly. Equipment from Enceladus existed in superposition. A core sample, both ice and vapor, a monitor that displayed last week and 7 years from now on the same line, refusing to fight about it. "We've had this conversation 42 times, Isaac said, comfortable the way a man becomes comfortable with repeating the one thing he's learned that matters. This is the one where you say yes faster." "To what?" Martin asked, though his chest already ached at the answer. "To becoming the instrument your helmets have been tuning for the rest of us," Isaac said. He gestured to a wall where documents and photographs coalesced from the tier's compliant geometry. Ilya Voronen's face, made myth by plume light, his hand pressed to a cocoon, chalk formulas with a new symbol threaded through them like a compass point. As Martin stepped closer, the arrangement rearranged. Not pictures, but math. Not words, but implication. until the message lay across the wall like a bridge. Your inability to imagine is the kept constant. 431.2 hertz is identity's resonance under state change. Teach coherence. Translate hunger into rhythm. The alarms returned, not louder, simply more right. The 60 hertz hum of Tier 0 picked up a sawtooth undertone that made nails feel like tuning forks. Yuki's voice reached them, not quite through speakers, not quite through air. "Hunger phase," she said. "They're waking wrong." Tier 0 unknit, as if the building had been a polite lie it could no longer maintain under pressure. Corridors rotated 90 degrees and insisted that they always had. Floors became ceilings until you looked away. Personnel ran past in states that made English verbs look imprecise, half here, half ahead. A man whose left arm had left, still typing at a console 2 doors down, sending commands his body had not yet decided to own. In Yuki's lab, 3 7th Series helmets stacked on her head deepened the air to a kind of stained glass music. The crystals of crystallized fear bottles chimed against each other in a chord no one had taught them. She held out a vial with slow glinting sediment. "Distilled boundary dissolution," she said. "If you touch prime at resonance, this might stop you from turning into metaphor." "I don't do metaphor," Martin said, chest tight with something that wasn't panic. Anticipation had numbers, if you asked it correctly. "That's precisely why you're the person who can go in," she said, and Soto's mouth did a quick, professional attempt at a smile, like a salute to courage in advance. The containment ring had stopped pretending to be architecture. The 7 pods were islands in a storm made of the idea of eating. 6 figures writhed in sleep that was waking too fast. The 7th lay absolutely still. If stillness could have expressions, this one had determination. Martin put his palm to Prime's pod. No frost bloomed, no sound. The pressure equalized across scales. The world widened until senses were obsolete and math replaced them. He felt a history that ran forward as if gravity had reversed. Humans changing state in a single generation without anchors to hold their names. Identity dissolved into infinite personal infinities, chewing the scaffolding of causality until the universe had to pick favorites to stay coherent. 1,000 survivors throwing themselves backward through the one channel that still crossed. Sleep, and building cocoons in ice where the future could remain unfrozen long enough to send a warning. "We need bridges," Prime said without saying, "not to carry bodies, to carry selfhood across." Martin injected the vial. He lifted the helmet from his head and set it on the floor outside the field, because at some point you stop using training wheels and discover if you can ride at all. 20%, and his fingernails whitened to translucence. 30, and Bone began to remember it was lattice. 47, and the option appeared. Isaac's anchor frequency humming in his chest like a promise of safe misery forever. He did not take it. 58, 68. The numbers stopped being numbers and became a state. He held at 68 because Prime had said hold, and because something in him that had nothing to do with obedience and everything to do with tuning fork resonance insisted this was the note. The hunger found him and broke around him the way water breaks around a piling that won't move. He felt Tier 0 as a graph. Nodes lit. Soto at the bulkhead. Pulse steady. Yuki under 3 helmets. Color bleeding from her eyes as tears that weren't wet. The med tech in the lab whispering the names of his children backward because numbers helped, even when you didn't understand why. He pushed patterns across the graph. Count to 5. Breathe on 3. Speak your ID. The building accepted the new function and reevaluated. Geometry consented to have corners again. Isaac stood beside him, anchor humming, and then, slowly, as a decision decided, reached up and deactivated it. The device in his chest went from a held cord to silence. He did not dissolve. He extended forward into himself, eyes bright with the way relief can hurt. Yuki removed one helmet, then the next, then the last. The music her synesthesia painted in the air softened from stained glass to watercolor. She reached for Martin. The first attempt passed through. The second found him. Their math aligned. Her fingers closed around a wrist that was also a vector and a proof and a human bone. "What now?" Soto asked, weapon low, body high definition ready. "Now we stop pretending this is a prison," a voice said from the far side of the ring, and Martin turned before he knew he would. Maya stood there, the 68% she had chosen written in faint, luminous filaments up her throat and across her cheeks, like the tracery of a machine built for the art it performed. She looked older by hours and by years in ways he could quantify and couldn't. His chest found a new shape around relief. "We open the doors," Maya said. "We teach anyone who asks. We tell the truth and let them choose." Above the ring, Tier Zero's intercom breathed and found a wider channel. The 60 hertz hum welcomed a new frequency that wasn't alarming so much as honest. The pods quieted. Prime's stillness acquired the feel of listening. Martin looked at the helmet on the floor and didn't reach for it. He stood in his tuned percentage and felt coherent. He thought of the page under his mattress with Maya's looping script in a second hand he had seen only in photographs from Enceladus, and understood why messages had to be written by more than one person to be read at all. He had spent his life learning how to be himself without pictures. Now the world needed exactly that, a way across that did not rely on imagining what you might be on the other side, only on remaining who you were while you moved. "Teach," he said, and the word left his mouth in a tone that set the building ringing like a bell. It sounded like 60 hertz. It sounded like 431.2. It sounded, to him and to everyone in the ring, exactly like a note you could balance a bridge on. By morning, Tier Zero had learned how to breathe with us. The hum that once swallowed the corridors at a strict 60 hertz now carried a second tone so soft you felt it before you heard it. A resonance that made handrails warmer, doors less reluctant, geometry more willing to be a building. The 7th Series helmets hung on wall hooks like instruments between sets. Some people wore them out of habit, some because the sound of their own thoughts used to scare them, some because symbols had begun to surface under their skin like constellations, and it helped to know a dial could steady the stars. I stood at 68% and did not need the dial. My skin held a translucent only when I wanted it. Beneath, the lattice of me glowed the way metal remembers sunlight after the sun goes down. When I spoke, the room tuned itself, not to me exactly, but to the part of itself that wanted to be coherent and had finally been given permission. "This isn't a sermon," I told the new arrivals. 24 men and women and a teenager with a shaved head who watched the world as if expecting it to split and hoping to see how. "It's a lesson in choosing. The only rule is that you keep your own name on the far side." On the observation ring above, Maya leaned against the rail, arms crossed, filaments of light faint along her throat where her change had written itself into a scar she chose. She listened the way engineers listen to engines, half at the sound, half at the silences around it. Isaac stood a little apart, hands behind his back in a posture that belonged to uniforms and quiet joy. The anchor in his chest was gone. He had settled somewhere past 90, not a number so much as a gleam, human outline filled with mathematics, so patient it read as mercy. Yuki moved along the back row with a tray of vials and a tablet that had learned her eyes. Color eddied around her laughter when she let it, a private aurora anyone could believe in, because they could feel the air change when it happened. When she looked at me, our math aligned and the room steadied. The trick of love, it turned out, wasn't seeing the same picture. It was choosing the same function and trusting each other to solve. Percentages aren't ranks, I said. They're balances. 5% and you'll still see in 3 dimensions, but your hunches will be better. 40 and you'll feel the shape of rooms with your palm on the wall. 94 and you'll hear weather like sheet music and change its key when it asks, "Isaac, wave." He did. A boy at the front flinched, then smiled, ashamed of flinching and relieved to learn he didn't have to pretend not to. Any percentage can be beautiful if you can carry it, I said. Any percentage can break you if you lie about it. A woman raised her hand because the old rituals still helped. She kept her helmet in her lap like an exit. "How do we know," she asked, "when we should stop?" "You keep track of your name," I said. "When you say it and it doesn't feel like it fits in your mouth, pause. If you say it and can't make it mean you, step back. There's no prize for disappearing." Silence moved through them like weather. The shaved-headed teenager lifted their hand without looking up. "What if your name was never comfortable? What if you want a new one?" "That's choosing," I said, and felt the hum behind the walls approve. "Call yourself what fits and keep it. This isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming you at a scale that used to be impossible." I sent them to the bays 2 at a time, the way we do now. One to sit beneath the 7th and learn the feel of regulated resonance. One to walk the observation ring and learn the taste of courage in the mouth. Soto took the second group around with the gentleness of someone who has decided, after a career of hard choices, that she'd rather point a person at their own strength than a weapon at their fear. She put palms on shoulders without asking for permission and moved them in the right direction. You didn't need permission to be kind, just practice being right about when. Outside, the Atacama kept its promise. Sky like a clean fraction, horizon ruled tight. Up top, they had built a fence for the reporters and a tent for the scientists who couldn't decide if we were an event or a hypothesis. Both tents had coffee. Both fences had gates. We didn't ask anyone for permission to live. We simply left the doors open. Prime and the other 6 waited in the ring below us like patient punctuation. You could call them cocoons. You could call them sarcophagi if you wanted to frighten yourself with a word that promised endings. We called them buffers because buffers make translation smooth. Their pods had opened once to test us and closed themselves again to give us time to learn. Even sleeping, they pressed on the air like rain on the ocean, making no visible change and changing everything anyway. I met Prime once more before it left. It was late. The corridors hushed to a single tone. The thermostat's readouts glowed numbers that anyone could parse and no one needed to. I found myself in the containment ring without deciding to be there. The way your mind sometimes arrives at an answer while your mouth is still asking the question. Prime's pod thrummed in a cadence I had come to hear as language. I walked close and laid my hand against the polymer. No frost bloomed. No ice insisted it was glass. The barrier accepted that what mattered could cross without arguing about states. You are carrying 68% with elegance, Prime inscribed. Not words, not sound, but pressure resolved by a receiver who finally knew how to be one. We will leave this place. We were only ever here to offer the loop a hinge. Where? I asked out loud because the night was too quiet to keep thoughts quiet. Elsewhere that has made the same mistake, Prime answered, and for a breath the pod and the room and my sternum all resonated at once. A chord so clean it felt like stepping into sunlight you didn't know your skin missed. Your kind can show them how not to dissolve. Your kind knows how to keep a name. The pod's glow softened. In the corner of the ring, a maintenance panel flickered in a way no panel was designed to. The universe had begun to notice that we kept time differently now, not because we made it obey, but because we had found the tempo it had been using all along. Tell me something human, I said, surprised by the ache in the ask. Tell me something we can carry that isn't math. There was a pause, the way a musician pauses to let a breath turn into a note. Your sister did not forgive herself for lying until you laughed in front of her for the first time, Prime said. She believed she had built a bridge of deceit. She needed to learn that bridges are made of choices and the weight they carry, not the names their builders give them. I swallowed against the shape that moved behind my ribs. Thank you, I said, and felt ridiculous for saying it, and didn't care. Thank you for coherence, Prime returned, and the pod went quiet, not sleeping, not gone, ready. Noose learned to speak in percentages. It stumbled at first, and then found footing. In some cities, billboards showed the human spectrum like a weather map. Temperatures replaced with thresholds, humidity with coherence. We told them the numbers meant nothing if they were bragged about, everything if they were kept. We asked them to stop making heroes of the high percentages and monsters of the highest. People listen the way they do when listening is the one thing left to try and the first thing that might work. Isaac taught a class called Anchors and Arcs in an old drone hangar we repurposed with tables that didn't agree with their corners until we asked them to. He drew with light on air like a conductor and showed people how not to nail themselves to suffering when choice offered something kinder. Some days, the ache in his voice made me look away. Some days, his joy did. He had been half transformed for years, and now that he wasn't, now that he had picked a percentage and it had picked him back, he moved through rooms like a man translating grief into past tense. Maya held the logistics with the ferocity of a person who had wasted her last lie on a necessary survival. She ran intake with a joke in her mouth and a ledger of difficult truths under her arm. When she rested, she did it in a chair beside the ring, feet up on the rail, eyes on the pods, as if making sure silence stayed honest. I never had pictures in my head, but if I did, I would have kept one of her there. I didn't need to. Her numbers were enough. Pulse a steady 58. Breathing low and even under stress. The small, irregular hitch when she thought about our father that she would deny until she didn't, and then never again. Yuki and I wrote a protocol and called it the percentage because titles help. It began with 3 questions and 1 choice. The questions were, what do you want to carry forward? What are you willing to let pass through you without keeping? Who will say your name back to you when you forget? The choice was simple and the hardest thing anyone does. Pick a number and stop when your name thins. We taught the experts to sit with not knowing. We taught the brave to take off their helmets slow. We taught the terrified to count and breathe and touch the wall with their palm, because walls will meet you halfway if you ask politely and mean it. On the last morning, the last as in final chapter, not in the way time means it anymore, we opened everything that had ever been closed here. The freight doors retracted. The service lifts rose and locked above the lip of the shaft like tongues of concrete. The fence topside swung out and clicked home and didn't bother to creak because it was proud of itself. The pods in the ring unlatched. 6 of the dreamers rose and looked around the way refugees look when the camp turns into a city. Prime stayed long enough to lay a hand on the inside of its pod where mine had been. The polymer darkened in a star the size of the promise it had kept, then cleared. They did not speak. They didn't have to. The air shimmered in a way your body reads as blessing when you learned a little math and a little humility. Then they lifted, not a levitation trick, not an insult to gravity, but a change in the way the universe asked them to answer its question, and were gone. People clapped, because humans clap when the ache in their chests needs a direction. Some cried. A few took off their helmets right then because courage is contagious and relief is an addictive drug safe in doses like that. Afterward, we cleaned. It felt right to sweep a floor where history stood. Soto mopped with the grim contentment of a soldier who has found a war she will not regret. Isaac straightened chairs that weren't chairs until you looked hard, and then they were. Maya checked the seals on the empty pods because that was who she was. And one day, if a different elsewhere needed a hinge, it would be good to know the bolts hadn't rusted for lack of use. Yuki found me by the observation glass and slipped her fingers through mine. Our hands had learned each other's math so well that the joining produced no flicker, just the quiet of a correct sum. She leaned her head to my shoulder. The color around her mouth was a shade I had learned to call glad because she had taught me its ratios. "What now?" she asked without fear in it. She was a scientist. What now is the only prayer we trust. "Classes," I said. "Intake at 9. The kid with the shaved head is going to 61. He thinks 58, but he's lying to himself because he's kind and doesn't want to scare his mother." "She'll be fine at 30, Yuki said. 33 if she lets herself stop apologizing for being happy." "And you?" I asked, though I knew her numbers better than my own pulse. 41, she said, smile carving into the air like proof. "I like spirals." "Keep it," I said. "We'll need someone to remember that not all lines are meant to be straight." We stood like that quietly while the building hummed in a key it had taught itself to use. Above us, the desert rippled the way heat does and then settled, because settling is a choice too. Somewhere in the building, a cart rolled and a bottle clinked back against glass, and I felt a ridiculous wave of affection for ordinary noises that used to mean nothing and now meant everything. We were here, together, doing dishes after saving a piece of the world. I thought about Ilya walking into a fountain of cold fire under a sky no one can own. I thought about the boy in Bay C counting backward by sevens as water that wasn't water learned how to stop being a lie. I thought about my sister lying on purpose and on time, about Isaac turning off a pain that had defined him and finding out he still had hands to hold, about Yuki teaching me that color is just numbers that learned how to bloom. "Come on," I said at last. "We promised them breakfast." We went to the canteen we had carved into bedrock beside the freight lift. Someone had already brewed coffee, and someone else had burned the first batch of eggs, because if you've never cooked for a room full of people at 37 different realities per square meter, you're going to make a mess the first time. We ate badly and with delight. People told the truth and invented games to make the telling easier. A woman at 20% fell into laughter so hard she scared herself, then laughed harder at the fact that she had been scared. A man at 82 stared at his hands and then not at them and then at them again till he remembered they belonged to him and always had. Before the day could tip into the part where the news arrived and the politicians with their tidy fear, I stood up on a chair because chairs are little stages if you ask them. "This is the last lesson," I said, and the room stilled the way rooms do when they sense a cadence that sounds like ending and beginning, layered. Keep your percentage to yourself unless sharing it helps someone else. Don't build a church out of a number. Don't make a weapon of it either. Choose, adjust, rest, repeat. When you can't feel your name, sit down. When you can feel it again, stand up. Love anything that makes the hum steadier, music, math, each other. And if a door opens that shouldn't exist, check your math, then go through together. A hand went up, palm smudged with coffee, a ring someone had decided to keep. "Are we done?" the woman asked, smiling because she already knew the answer and wanted to hear it anyway. "We've only reached the part where we can stop pretending we're alone," I said. "The rest is numbers and choices. The rest is breakfasts and grief and days when the hum is wrong and we fix it. The rest is teaching. The rest is you." After lunch, Yuki dragged me to the surface because she liked to see sky when decisions had been made. The fence line shimmered. Reporters waited with patience we had not earned and were going to try to. A kid in a borrowed suit asked me if I was a hero, and I told him no, because heroes are stories, and we were done with those. I told him I was a bridge. He wrote it down. Maybe he kept the sentence. Maybe he made it better. We watched the desert hold still. The wind came up lightly and counted our hair. The sun wrote its hard, clean line along the lip of concrete. Under our feet, Tier 0 breathed in both keys, the old one that kept floors from tilting and the new one that let people stand where they hadn't known there was a place for them. "Do you ever wish," Yuki asked, eyes closed to better feel the heat, "that you could see the pictures everyone else sees?" I thought about it honestly. I thought about the years I'd spent pushing against the blank field behind my eyes like it was a door a stronger person would have opened. I thought about the moment Prime said, "You know how to keep a name," and the way something inside me finally stopped kicking to get out and realized it had been home the whole time. "No," I said, and it came out like relief. "I like the world this way. It's so much easier to love when you can count it." She laughed. The small bell sound that turns air to stained glass in colors I'll never see and don't need to. She threaded her fingers through mine, and we stood at the lip of a shaft where the impossible rides elevators now, and we waited for the next door to open. Somewhere 1,000 kilometers from us, In a hospital where morning shifts change on the hour no matter what the sky thinks, someone put on a 7th series helmet for the first time and decided on 9% and found they could breathe without counting aloud. Somewhere in a city that forgets how to sleep, a woman took hers off and walked to the river and felt the water carry a melody it had always had and never shared. Somewhere in a house with too many stairs and carpets that smelled like dog, a boy at 12 asked his mother what he should become, and she said yourself and meant it in a way that finally had instructions. Back underground, the empty pods kept their shape and their silence. We didn't fill them. We didn't need to. The buffer had moved from ice to us. I am 68% today. I tell my students the number because it helps them choose, and I keep it because it helps me remember. Tomorrow, it might be 67. I'll listen. If it's 70, I'll stop and ask my name and wait to recognize the answer. I will make coffee badly and learn. I will press my palm to walls and let them meet me halfway. I will love out loud. I will count when the counting steadies the air and sing when the hum needs a voice. We are the percentage we pick and the hands we hold while we pick it. We are the bridge and the ones crossing. We are the kept names and the new ones. We are the lesson and the rest of the book. The hum deepens. The elevator rises. The doors open. Class, I say, and the room listens. Let's begin.